There we are.
Awesome.
Really good.
Okay, we're ready to get started here. I'm going to do I guess I don't do this every week, but let's just do a quick sound check with the people on Zoom. Are you hearing me okay? And can we hear you?
Yes, sir.
That is John. Excellent, John. That was perfect. Your volume was just that good. So before we get started, we have some quick announcement. I don't know, is this sustainability office or point B or both?
Cool.
Oh, well, come up here so they can see you at home.
Oh, I'm nervous. Okay. This is my first class announcement. Thank you. This is my first class announcement. So please bear with me. I don't have all my thoughts together, but the sustainability office has funded a grant to create a walkability audit specific to university campuses. It's a project that I have been working on as a research assistant with Professor Andy Hong. We now have a walkability audit to be utilized for the university campus to start gathering data, to start informing both the sustainability office, the university planning and design team, the facility side of things, to provide them with walkability data for the campus. We are hosting a workshop on April 5th. Thank you. We are having one workshop on April 4th. It's a Tuesday from 12 to 2, which I understand is somewhat in the middle of folks' work days, but if you do have an opportunity to come up to campus, we will do a brief introduction to walkability and its importance on university campuses, the components of the audit, and then we will be going out and performing the audits themselves on the university campus. This will be the first time that we are utilizing the audit that we have created, so it'll be an exciting opportunity to test it out, but also to provide data for decision makers. So I will send out an RSVP link, but you are also welcome to email me. I will send out my email with the RSVP link if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you. Oh my gosh, they're the most important. Really,
Most important thing. I'm going. Okay, can you start over again?
we will have an event.
Okay. Our presenter tonight is Andrea Olson, and is the planning director for UDOT, and she's the state's chief transportation planner, and we're delighted to have her here. This is a position that traditionally, at least in my observation, has always been held by a civil engineer, even though it's called planner. And Andrea is at least the first person since I've lived in Utah who's been in this position, who's a real honest to goodness planner. She got her master's degree in planning from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and she's been in the field here for 20 years, working sometimes for the private sector, sometimes for the public sector, Governor's Office of Planning and Budget and Wasatch Regional Council, but also for several of the leading consulting firms in town. And she's been in this position for 4 years.
Just about 4 years.
4 years. And it's great to have you with the WTA tonight, Andrea, and take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate the 20 years, but it's actually more like 30 years I've been working in planning in Utah. So do you advance the slides?
Yeah,
I got you. So yeah, if you want to go to the next one. So thank you for including me in this. I think I think what the Wasatch Transportation Academy is doing is just fabulous, and it's great to see so many involved. It's great to see people in Moab that are Moab that are involved in this. From a very selfish perspective, I'm happy to. I'm getting some thumbs up from Moab.
Parents do it a little.
From a selfish perspective, I love to see things like this happening because I'm a firm believer that the better informed about transportation in general, but transportation planning process, the more informed people are about that, the better plans we make, the better decisions we make, and better our world is as a result of it. So what I want to talk about tonight is just go through some of the things that UDOT planning does. Some of them you may have heard of before, some of them you may not necessarily be aware of. Some of them are brand new and pretty exciting. And then how does an idea become a transportation? How does it get built? How does it become an actual project? So we'll walk through that. And then talk a little bit about where in that process you can get involved. And then probably some places where you should get involved, where it may be more, you may have more effect in that process. And then leave you with some potential resources in terms of getting involved in transportation planning with UDOT specifically, not the state level. So if you want to. So this is kind of the thing that we, and when I say we, I mean UDOT planning, we are federally required to do a long-range transportation plan. We do it, we have responsibility for doing planning for the rural parts of the state. So any part of the state that's not covered by one of our 4 MPOs, and you've probably had someone from an MPO here next week, you'll have somebody coming. So those are the urbanized areas. And UDOT does the long-range planning for anything outside of those urbanized areas. The plan covers about 30 years right now. We're just wrapping one up that's going to go from 2023 out to 2050. And then we divide that up into 3 phases. So it's a little bit easier to kind of place projects in that time frame, but 3 phases over 30 years. It's multimodal. It covers active transportation, biking and walking, transit, and then highway projects. So we have the responsibility for the statewide long-range plan, which is in the middle, but there are several pieces of other UDOT planning processes that go into or are referenced by the long-range plan. And so one of those is the state freight plan, and that's the picture in the middle on the left side. That's really important. You've heard Utah be referred to as crossroads of the West. You know, with our freeway system, we do have higher than average truck traffic. And so being able to, understand what kinds of freight projects are required. And we need to have a freight plan to access some federal freight funds to build some freight projects. So a freight plan is a piece of what we do. The transportation asset management plan, or it's the TAMP, that's making sure, we're looking out at pavement life, replacing pavement when we know it's not going to, be safe anymore or stand up to, the traffic that it's getting. The strategic highway safety plan at the top is really important. That's federally required as well. We get funds specifically designated for safety projects. And so that's our plan for how we're going to spend the money. So all 3 of those plus others, those are kind of just the 3 highlights, are also important parts of that long-range transportation plan. And then we do that planning cycle on a 4-year basis. And then our MPO partners, the 4 MPOs around the state, they do a plan every 4 years at the same time that we do. And when we're all done, we put those plans together, and those are the statewide unified plan. So Utah's unified transportation plan. We are the only state in the country that does this. It buys us a lot of credit, I think, with particularly with the legislature. They, in the last couple of years, have really, when they've had funds to expend, maybe surplus or one-time funds, they have looked to our early projects, our phase 1 projects that we have in the unified plan, because they know that all of this planning entities have worked together to come up with those projects, come up with the funding that we're assuming in there. And so I think it's given us a lot of credibility with legislature, with the Federal Highway Administration, and with our planning partners. I think it's a unique process, but has been valuable to us statewide. A couple other things that the UDOT Planning Division is responsible for, a couple programs. One is the TravelWise program, and that's our travel demand management. And that really aims to get people out of single occupant vehicles. So it directs you to carpooling resources, to active transportation, routes, bicycle routes, things like that. It's really a behavior, kind of a behavior change program. It actually started prior to when we were planning for the 2002 Winter Olympics. And, if you were around here at that time, the kind of first tactic they took was just to scare everybody. We are going to scare everybody to death, and they're not going to want to get in a car because they're going to be so, you're not going to be able to get anywhere. And then I think they realized that that wasn't probably very effective. And so instead of kind of the scare tactics, they came up with this travel demand management program to, hey, instead of driving your car by yourself up to Park City before the men's downhill, well, that would have been a snow base, and before the slalom event, let's hope you find other resources. So it has lived on since then. Move Utah is another active transportation program intended to help communities. So we really work closely with local governments, kind of wherever they are on the active transportation spectrum. If it's helping them find funds to do, or even just to do an active transportation plan, Move Utah can do that. If it's to, we have helped cities. We convened a law enforcement forum in one city where different law enforcement agencies just sometimes didn't know the laws, honestly, related to cycling. And so we got, multiple levels of law enforcement together and talked about, what the laws were, enforcement, how to best enforce them, things like that. Another group that we got together was down in Richfield and Richfield was very interested in how they could kind of take advantage of, from an economic development perspective, how they could really capitalize on mountain biking and the active transportation in that area and make it kind of more of a tourist destination. And so we brought in some economic development and tourism experts. So Move Utah is really intended to meet a community where they are and their immediate needs. Some relatively new, now these are getting to be a few years old, but we have a planner in each one of UDOT's 4 regions. And this is certainly new. The region 2 one is vacant as of today. So if anyone's interested, we'll be announcing that soon. But these positions are really a very good connection with the local governments. They're really a conduit for us at UDOT being able to better understand what the goals of a community are. What's their vision for themselves? What are their objectives? What do they want to see? What kind of a transportation system would best support the vision that they have for themselves? And I think our region planners are really a great resource for that and have the ability to kind of form those relationships with those governments and help the rest of UDOT better understand, what a city might think is valuable in terms of transportation. In 2018, we were directed by the legislature to lead a statewide effort on transportation, strategic transportation planning. So we really tried to cast a wide net in terms of who we included in that. We had departments of health, we had different advocacy groups, we had chambers of commerce from around the state, and really got everybody together to try to come together on something that we could all take with us to our respective agencies and use as kind of a foundation or guiding principles, if you will. And so what came out of that was a quality of life, using a quality of life framework for how we evaluate and implement transportation. And so the 4 outcomes that we talk about are good health, strong economy, better mobility, and connected communities. and you're gonna see this again tonight, but the intent was that every agency, every group that was involved be able to take this framework to their organization or to their city and implement it how it best fit with, you know, what their vision for themselves was. And so this is something that we are talking a lot more about at UDOT. You will refer to the quality of life. In fact, it's in our mission statement. And you'll hear quality of life, I think, more as we talk about transportation planning, you know, throughout other agencies as well. I think one thing that happens is that people think that UVision is UDOT's strategic plan, and that's not the case, and it wasn't intended to be the case. It was UDOT convened this group and, you know, to agree on these principles, and then for everybody to implement those principles themselves. Another thing that the planning division is very involved in is project prioritization. So this is basically how we decide or how we recommend what projects to get funded. And we have a transportation commission that makes all of our funding decisions. So we have 4 project types: highway, active transportation, transit, and last mile projects. And we score lists, 4 lists. So a list of each of those kinds of projects. And what we score them on are performance measures that are related to the quality of life outcomes. So the things that came out of that UVision strategic planning process. And so just as a quick example, if we have a list of 30 active transportation projects, one of the measures that we are looking at right now and this is probably one of, you know, 8 or 10 measures that we would score this project on, would be how much potential does that project have to have people shift their mode? So mode shift potential. So how likely is it that you are going to, if we build this project, that you're going to stop driving your car and are going to ride your bicycle to make that trip? And so that mode shift potential then relates to better mobility. So that's kind of how those 4 quality of life outcomes get implemented at UDOT and when we are making project decisions.
Do you ever think about like those qualifiers for the people who aren't using the proposed project? Like, for example, like if it's like you know, building a road or expanding a road, you know, it might benefit the people who are using that road, but do you think about also the impact it has on people who might not be using that project? Does that make sense?
So do you mean like land use impacts, like?
You know, land use or impacts on transportation. Does that make sense? Like I'm just thinking, like, if you were to expand State Street, for example,
Yeah.
You know, it might improve the economy of people being able to get into downtown better, might improve better mobility for people on the road, right? You know, connect communities better, but it would have all these negative impacts on the people who aren't necessarily driving on State Street. Is that something that's taken into account?
Right. So that's a really good question. And I think it's something, I think we have not been very good at that in the past, but I think we're getting better at it. You know, one of the things that transportation planners and traffic engineers rely on a lot is these a travel demand model and then a traffic simulation model. And they have historically not been great about, you know, they can tell you like how many people are going to be on this road and how in a car and how many people are going to be making left turns at this intersection. But I don't think they have done a particularly good job of, okay, but if we widen the road and we have to take out the bike lanes, you know, is it overall a detriment to the road that we've added vehicle capacity, but we've taken away a lot of other transportation capacity. So I think we are making strides though in, you know, I talked a little bit about performance measures and kind of the metrics that we use to measure success. And I think those, you're definitely seeing a shift in those, because for a long time it was volume to capacity, you know, like how many cars can we fit on this road? And that's our measure of success. And as long as it's, you know, 1.0, so we're not over capacity, then we're good. Or level of service especially in the PM peak hour. And this just drives me absolutely crazy because, you know, for a long time, people thought, well, UDOT plans for level of service D in the peak hour. So if we're trying to do that, we are chasing our tails, and we are, you know, especially with the growth that we have, we can't keep up with that. So some of the measures that we're starting to use are travel time reliability. So it's not necessarily that you can get there more quickly, but you know how long it's going to take to get there. Another one that I think is hugely important is person throughput. Let's not look at vehicle throughput. Let's look at how many people we can get through this corridor. And transit is probably, you know, a big winner in that, because transit can move people through a corridor far more efficiently than vehicles can. So I think it's, like I said, we haven't done a good job. I think with the metrics that are becoming more used now, I think we're doing a better job of that kind of stuff.
Are you doing direct measurement of pedestrian and bicycle and transit use? Are you doing direct measurement?
We are not yet. We are just on the verge of implementing an active transportation counter program. That's in, you know, that's going to be put in place in the Wasatch area. But we don't have great data for pedestrians and cyclists. Actually, in Utah County on the Murdoch Canal Trail, I think they do a very good job of counting users. And so we know that, you know, this is going to be a bigger and bigger part of what we do. And so having the data to support, you know, who's using it and what we can expect in the future is really important. And so we're getting up to speed on that. But on specific projects, they will go out and count pedestrians.
Which ones?
Well, I mean, if you're doing a corridor study, you know,
I'm wondering which ones, because there are some corridor studies and corridors that are developing right now. And I'm curious whether or not you're measuring them.
I'm not involved at the project level. I just know when they are looking at a corridor and trying to identify what's the best transportation, what are the best transportation solutions in that corridor, that they will go do ped counts and cyclist counts. I mean, I could list some state highways, and, you know, they've probably done some active transportation counts on them at some point. What, you know, ones that have gone on them in the last year, I can find out for you, but I you know, I don't have it off the top of my head.
You actually have a question on Zoom too. Do you want to unmute Michael?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Loud and clear.
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm in Moab, and the main thing we need to make the downtown more livable is a bypass, but the town is against it. So how do you put something in a transportation plan that may be needed by 2050 if the local government doesn't think they want one, but you get 6,000 18-wheelers passing through your town every day?
Well, being involved in the long-range transportation plan is certainly a part of it, but, you know, I guess I'm going to be completely honest with you. If your city is against it, and Moab specifically asked us to take any reference to a bypass off of any maps or any plans that we had, you know, that's a tough sell. So I think getting elected, having, you know, engaged people in positions of local government is always great. But, you know, I know that's not feasible for everybody, but that's a tough one. If your city and or your county is against it, it's tough to get, you know, especially impactful projects like that on long range plans. It's not impossible. You know, we just went through an engagement, stakeholder engagement process related to the long range plan that we're doing I'm not exactly sure what came out of it in terms of the Moab bypass. I don't think we heard, that there was a want to put that back on, but I could be mistaken about that.
So to follow up on the Moab thing.
But I just have can you hear me? I just have one follow-up. Is that okay?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Yeah, so, but what if, like, for your freight plan or your strategic highway plan, you just need it to keep the trucks moving? Isn't there a point at which the needs of the state are more important than one little town on the route?
Well, I guess I would hesitate to say that. UDOT doesn't, we don't want to go into a community and build something that, the community is not supportive of. And I get that you are supportive of it. And I know this has been an issue in Moab, for years and years and years. But, UDOT isn't, I guess, is very unlikely to come in and build a facility of that size and expense and controversy when Moab itself is wrestling with what that looks like and where it goes and if it should even exist. So I don't know that I'm answering your question, but I cannot think of a situation where UDOT would come in and say, what we need for freight trumps what Moab City wants. And so we're going to build this, bypass.
So I'd like to follow up with two challenges to your assertions. One is that the UDOT is only going to do something that the city wants. Because on Highway 191, there's a major reconstruction project. And a number of people raised the issue about bicycles and pedestrians coming into town from the north end of town. UDOT did not do a study of this. This is the largest migration of cyclists on a daily basis in the entire state. On many days, 1,000 or more cyclists will come down North Main Street. UDOT did not do any kind of a study on this. And as a result, there is a 1.2 mile section where there's no bicycle or pedestrian crossings. There's another 2/3 of a mile section, there's no bicycle or pedestrian crossing.
So crossing 191 or along 191?
Crossing of 191. And so there are brew pubs on the other side that all these cyclists are looking at. What are they going to do? So UDOT did not do a study to figure out what that traffic flow was like and how that traffic flow was going to come to town. They don't know the numbers. Nobody ever counted it.
Well, Kevin, can we maybe rephrase it and use it?
So the question is, my question is, what are you doing? And is complete streets a part of UDOT's approach to transportation planning, especially in urban areas?
And maybe we can change the verb tense and just say they haven't done it yet. Because past is not necessarily prologue. And what hasn't been done in the past does not define what could happen in the future.
They certainly have not done it yet.
Okay, establish that.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not going to argue with you about that. You know the situation far better than I do. So the question about is complete streets part of what we do? We actually have not necessarily use the term complete streets, but we are using an all users. That's our kind of take on it, that we need to accommodate all users in a corridor, not necessarily on a street, not on I-15. We're not putting bike lanes on I-15 and we shouldn't, but we should be accommodating people on foot and on bicycles in that corridor and be able to cross that corridor. I think, so I had a thought when you were, so one thing I'm going to talk about in a minute is the Utah Trail Network, which I think might be something that, you know, could be a benefit to what you're talking about, to making active transportation connections of regional significance and regional level connections. But there was another piece of your question that I'm forgetting.
My question was just that you all endorse complete streets. I mean, I did question whether or not UDOT was actually engaging local communities in directions that they wanted to go, and whether or not UDOT actually uses traffic counters where they're applicable for bicycle and pedestrian traffic.
So I can't speak to the specifics of the 191 reconstruction. If they did active transportation counts, you don't think they did, and I'm not gonna dispute that. You know, I think as we are getting more and more into the active transportation, we're gonna start building and maintaining active transportation facilities, and that's what I'm gonna talk about in a couple slides. And so I think having that data, doing those counts, having automatic counters is going to be a big piece of that, because, you know, we count cars for roads we build, we better be counting active transportation users for trails we build. So going forward, I think we will be doing more of that. Is that?
I mean, do you want my reaction? It was a big missed opportunity because it's the #1 place, maybe in the Western United States, in terms of cycling traffic on a daily basis. And you guys missed it. And everybody said,
I'm not going to argue with you about it.
You can like Google Moab, and it's like, oh, my God.
Sure, you're right. And, you know, I think we are trying to do better going forward. I don't know what else to say. We have a solutions development process, which is really intended to help us better understand the priorities of a local area, the vision and goals and objectives that they have for themselves. It's really intended to bridge the gap between short-term planning. So when we know exactly what the project is that we're going to build and what that looks like, in the long-term planning, where we may just know what that there's going to be a transportation issue in the future, but not necessarily know what that project looks like. And so this is a process, a corridor planning process to really help us kind of put the meat on the bones of that. Like, what should that project include? What mode should it be? Should it be transit? Should it be, high capacity bus service? Should it be active transportation? And we really need to consider local and regional priorities. Land use is a big piece of that, certainly economic development. And then, if natural environment is a priority for the area. One of the things I think that's unique about this is everybody, the intent is to bring all stakeholders together in this process, and then everybody leaves the process with something to do. If a city has said, transit, BRT is important for us in this corridor, they may leave this process needing to change their zoning to increase densities that would be supportive of transit. So it's intended that everybody kind of has some skin in the game. Some new things at UDOT that we're working on. One is context classification. So this is really intended to move away from the, arterial, expressway, collector, local street schema. And because that doesn't really give you much information in terms of what kind of land use, what kind of context is that particular road serving. And so we are starting to look now at, what are the different contexts that our facilities need to serve. This image is actually from Florida. Florida DOT is kind of one of the states that's out in front and doing this work. And you can see, and I particularly noticed the one that kind of goes through the middle of all of them. Like, that may be the same, that might be State Street, but it goes through so many different context, that the standards for each of those different contexts shouldn't be the same, even though it's the same road going through all of them. So that's a big effort for us right now. Another one that just passed or got funded in the legislative session that just wrapped up a couple weeks ago is the UDOT Trail Network. And this is really, I think the best way to describe it is that this is kind of the freeways and arterials, the freeways and the state routes for active transportation. UDOT we had on a couple of projects built trails alongside Legacy Parkway as an example, Mountain View Corridor, building a trail alongside. But this is really apart from highway projects that we intend to build and maintain separated facilities, hard surface facilities that can serve as viable alternative transportation options around the state, that are regional connectors, connect into, local trail systems that other cities might have put together. But this is brand new. We're just getting it going. We have far more questions about this than we have answers. But for the first year of this, we have $90 million. So there's $45 million ongoing every year. And then the legislature gave one-time appropriation of $45 million for the first year. So this is something that I see, what you're talking about in Moab. I think something like this would be a huge opportunity and maybe be able to make that connection that didn't, that got missed the first time around. I think this is a resource for opportunities just like that.
What is what projects are targeted, given that you have an allocation for the first year, this big chunk? What are you all going to do with that in the first couple of years?
Well, we're trying to figure out right now what the criteria, like what differentiates these trails from a trail that, a Mill Creek City might build. Kind of like there's certainly a differentiation between what state roads we build and maintain. We're trying to come up with a criteria that we can distinguish between the trails that UDOT builds and maintains. In terms of what facilities we're going to build right away, I don't know the answer to that. That's, when I said we have far more questions than we do answers, that's certainly one of them.
Well, is this the ATIP?
This is ATIP, yeah.
Laura was here our very first night and told us this was coming.
Yeah.
It was in the governor's budget.
Yeah, they probably hadn't, the session probably hadn't ended at that point.
Well, it hadn't even started, I don't think.
Oh, really?
Or it had just started.
Yeah.
And I think their target was a little bit higher than what they came away with, but it was, they got most of it.
Yeah.
But so is this there are other TIFs, transportation improvement funds. Is this gonna follow a kind of a similar type of planning process?
Yes.
Soliciting projects and then sorting them according to criteria.
We probably won't solicit, well, and again, this is all speculation on my part, everything I say now, but the soliciting for projects we do when it's a local government that wants to build it and has to come to the table with either a 30% or a 40% match. There would be no match. UDOT is building it, but the criteria on which so if we have a map, if we were magically be able to produce a map of, okay, here are all the trails in Utah that fit this criteria, how do we decide which ones to build first? We would use, I think right now, something close to that, the project prioritization model that I talked a little bit about, that has different performance measures, can look at what's the propensity for somebody to shift mode if this project were in place. We'll probably use something like that, but we just don't have the details of it yet. But we have, a fair amount of money to spend in the first year. So I think we will be getting at that quickly. But just to distinguish, and I'm glad you brought that up, Kate. So and we got to change the names of these because they all run together. So this is ATIF, which is the Active Transportation Investment Fund. And there's TIF-AT, which is the Transportation Investment Fund, Active Transportation.
Oh dear.
Right. And they're two different things. Well, they're both trails for active transportation, one UDOT builds fully, one UDOT pays 60% of. So anyway, that's ATIP is the one that UDOT pays, builds the whole trail, and TIF-AT is the one that local governments have an opportunity to nominate projects. Sorry.
So I'm just curious about like suitability of like, in my head, I think of like Parley's Canyon and I-80, that connection that's been talked about for years. Like, would that be a good candidate? Because it's not like there's really a locality following that interstate that's gonna like jump in and be like, oh, we'll put that down. Like that's kind of that no man's land between Salt Lake and
Right.
Summit.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought that one up, because I was just talking to somebody a couple hours ago, literally, about that exact piece. Like, people have been talking about a trail up Parley's for a long time, and now that, if one of the criteria of this ATIF is to connect systems, that's a perfect candidate, right? Because there's a system in the valley. The Parley's trail probably being the closest in proximity, and then all of the trails that Summit County and Park City have on the upper end. So yeah, I don't think that there necessarily has to be a local government championing a project for us to, understand that this would be an important gap filler or connection. So I don't think that would necessarily inhibit us from pursuing something like that, but because I think the potential connection, plus we have people riding bicycles on I-80, which isn't ideal, but we can't, there's a safety concern there for sure. We would love to be able to provide something that is safer certainly for the cyclists.
Also, does it have to be paved, or like if it's in a crunch, can it be like a packed?
Well, it does. The legislation actually says it does have to be paved. There are other state entities that do more recreational and mountain bike trails. I get you're not necessarily referring to those, but it was kind of a understanding the nexus that the Utah Department of Transportation should be providing transportation. And so we are looking at transportation facilities that potentially take cars off the road, and that it's not necessarily recreation. Obviously, recreationalists are going to be using these trails, but that we are thinking about them and looking at them from a transportation perspective. Dave?
Thinking the planning for the trail.
It's TBD. That position has not been filled.
Another job opening, hey.
Right, yeah.
Funds only for building of new stuff, or can they be used for enhancing existing paved pathways?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that.
I have a question on Zoom too. How much ATIF funding do we have to put towards these kind of projects?
So it'll be ongoing, $45 million a year, actually $44,100,000, because there's 900,000. So one of the things that we had in order to make this work, we had to get is staff to do this. And so there's 900,000 specifically carved out for people, for FTEs, in order to run this program. So 45 million, more jobs, exactly. 45 million ongoing. But like I said, the first year, there's an additional $45 million of one-time funding.
So Heidi can't do it all.
Heidi cannot do it all. She is trying her best, but I feel like we're working her to the ground.
I feel like this is an exciting topic, so I
It is, absolutely.
Is you not maybe thinking at all urban trails in this, or is it mostly kind of connecting between urban areas?
No, I think urban trails would absolutely be a part of it. Because there are a lot of connections to make. And again, if we're looking at this from a transportation perspective, connecting cities along in the I-15 corridor. I think Jordan River Parkway is a good example of what this would be. If Jordan River Parkway didn't already exist, I think that would be a great candidate for the Utah Trail Network. Now, if we could use those funds, because I know there's some maintenance work that needs to be done on there. And again, I don't know the answer to that, but but you know, it connects many communities. It's part of the Golden Spoke, so you can go all the way from Provo to Ogden, I think, and Jordan River is a big piece of that. So I think that's the kind of thing that we're looking at. So certainly urban areas as well, not just connecting like up Harley's Canyon.
Very exciting.
Yeah, it really is.
So how would we all stay connected to the development of the planning process and how things get rolled out? Is there going to be a place on the website that we could go to and monitor this?
Yeah, I'm sure once they get, you know, there's literally out of, so there's a whole new group that has been formed at UDOT, and I think it's total of 25 people, 5 of them specifically for the Utah Trail Network, and then 19 of them for transit, and then there's a leader of this group. So, and there are 2 people in positions of this 25 people. So I think once they start getting staff in those positions, there absolutely will be a web presence for, you know, where they are in the process, what they're looking at in terms of, you know, criteria for these types of facilities, you know, how to be involved in giving comment for, you know, what should or should not maybe be a facility. But yeah, I think at this point, that's probably the best. I'm not aware of any particular like PR campaigns that they are going to be putting out there, but I wouldn't be surprised if there is something like that.
I get another question. So yeah, what is the process of UDOT taking over a city or county road? What factors are evaluated in making this decision? Actually, I'll add on to that. How about vice versa, like in the chance where the city takes over one of UDOT's right of ways too?
Yeah.
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 Exactly.
Yeah. There certainly have been cases where, you know, the UDOT will give up jurisdiction. I think North Temple is a good example. I think the other one I was thinking of just escaped me. You know, in terms of making roads state highways, we don't do that a lot. We're typically looking for, it's often a trade. Oh, Porter Rockwell Boulevard just became a state highway when that bridge got completed. But when that became a state highway, it's 146 south that goes through Bluffdale was a state highway, and that became not a state highway anymore. And so there was legislation written that as soon as that Porter Rockwell Bridge opened, that was now a state highway, and 146 wasn't anymore. So typically the scenario is if we're taking on a new state highway, something else is coming off the list. And we, again, work closely with local governments. There are, you know, some quarters that they want to have more control over, and that, you know, they want to use different standards than UDOT might use. But often it's hard for local governments because the maintenance, you know, the plowing and the fixing the asphalt and that kind of stuff is not cheap. And so that is often a heavy lift financially for local governments. So there is a process. It doesn't happen a ton. We have also had the legislature tell us, UDOT, you're taking over 1600 North in Orem. That was a couple of years ago. That became a state highway because the legislature told us it was going to be a state highway. So there are, you know, multiple ways to do it, but it's not a very common occurrence. Let's see. Oh, so okay. Sorry, I'm going to go through this quick, but so we go through a planning process. Often an idea for a transportation project comes about because it's solving a problem. There's a need out there. There's, you know, congestion or just lack of facilities or whatever it is. We go through a public engagement process that was part of our long range planning effort. Our MPO partners do the same thing. And then it gets on the long range plan. And remember, I talked about, we look about 30 years out. It's in 3 phases, kind of near term, midterm, long term. Depending on when we feel like that project is needed, we'll put it in the appropriate phase. And then once it's on the long range plan, we can study it more. If we put something in the 3rd phase, we may not know a lot about it. And in fact, I would argue we shouldn't know a lot about it. We should know that this is an area where there's going to be concern in the future. let's put it on the plan, let's study it more. So we may find out, well, this is really a great place for BRT, or this is a great place for an HOV lane. And so once it gets on the plan, we can look more at that and kind of flesh it out and start adding details to the project. At some point it gets funded, usually when it gets into phase 1 of those long range plans, that's when it's most likely to get funded. There's a few of our funding sources right there, the TIF that I talked about, TTIF. Transportation Solutions is funding that we typically use for preservation and maintenance of asphalt and concrete, that kind of stuff. And then federal funding is about 20% of the funding that we use, which is very different. Utah is very different that way than most other states. We don't rely on federal funding quite as much. Once a project gets funded, it goes into what's called the STIP, Statewide Transportation Improvement Program. That's a list of everything we are going to do with very specific funding sources identified for the next 4 years. And then once it's on the STIP, then it goes to construction. So one thing I didn't mention there is environmental. We will do an environmental process. If you don't mind advancing to the next one. We can do an environmental. It's really important part of our process, but it can be done at multiple places. It can be done while it's in the long range plan. It can be done before it gets into the long range plan.
Did it go too far?
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, let's perfect. That's so the stars there are where you can get involved. All of those pieces have public involvement components. You notice under construction, I shaded that star because it's really hard. You don't have much of a chance to change anything if a project is under construction. Dave.
You can't know, and I did. Which is the bike lanes on Victory Road. I talked to the construction manager of that, the project manager. They found contingency funds to add 2 feet to the width of Victory Road, which added enough room to put bike lanes both directions on Victory Road within 2 weeks of when the project was going to be completed.
And that is a huge win. And I applaud you. And I'm glad you did because I live in close to that area. But I hope that you'll agree with me that that would have been easier had that been included from the project from the beginning. Okay, good. So you're the exception that proves the rule. And like I said, I'm thrilled to hear that you were able to get that done. It's a lot harder when there's bulldozers out there turning dirt. It's a lot harder to get it done. So if you go to the next slide, Matt. So this is when I would suggest, go back one. So the size of the star is when you're going to have the most impact. And so I would suggest you get involved in the long range plan process. It's not sexy. There's not, they're not putting highways through your backyard, but it's where all ideas can be on the table. You're not even limited by the language that they use in the environmental process. You can talk about anything at that point. And it's far easier to think big and have big vision the earlier you are in the process. So as it moves through, there's always opportunities for public comment and public engagement and stakeholder engagement. But as it gets closer and closer to construction, it's harder and harder to kind of change the parameters. And then funding gets tied to it, honestly. And once funding gets tied to it, it's a lot harder to change things. So I would encourage you to be involved early and often, and where it's, I would argue it's more fun in the planning process. It's creative. You can think wildly. Resources available. I think local elected officials are good resources for what's being planned in their communities. Like I said, the region planners, specifically for UDOT projects, we've got one in each of the 4 regions, except we're missing one in region 2 right now. The MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, the 4 around the state, you're going to hear from, is it TED next week, WFRC? UDOT project managers, which Dave has had success working with those in terms of getting the scope of a project change. And then one resource that UDOT started using right before the pandemic was publicinput.com. And so if you get to UDOT's portal on publicinput.com, you can see everything that we are currently seeking public input on. And it ranges from long-range plan process to an environmental process to, the STIP. Once the STIP gets pulled together, it goes out for public comment every year. And so all of those things are located there. So
There you are.
that's it.
Fantastic. Well, we had our Q&A kind of in between and we were right at our break time. So let's go ahead and take our break and reconvene in 10 minutes. We're going to be working in groups tonight, but we'll start all together first before we break up into groups to kind of check signals and schedule, because we're down to the last 4 weeks of the class. And so we need to kind of plot out what happens next and how you all integrate with that. So 10 minutes, so that's about 12 after, and we'll regroup back here. Great, fielding whatever comes her way. I don't know, real true professional. In terms of schedule, next week, Ted Olson, the Deputy Director of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, our local metropolitan planning organization, at least in the Salt Lake region, will be here. Ted is known to many of our university students because he also teaches here. And then 2 weeks from tonight will be our panel on advocacy. This is a new thing this year. We haven't done it before, and we've got 4 transportation advocates. I know we've got a number of advocates also in the class, so this should be a robust conversation. But we have some of the kind of old guard advocates, and we have some also very new guard advocates from people that have been working in advocacy for decades, people that started just several years ago, people that work in a variety of different communities. And so I think it should be really interesting. So that's 2 weeks from tonight. 3 weeks from tonight and 4 weeks from tonight, we have presentations, final presentations of projects. And our jury for those 2 nights include Councilmember Ana Valdemoros and Councilmember Darren Mano from the Salt Lake City Council, and Carlton Christensen, who is a member of the UTA Board of Trustees. And they're going to be here in the room. I haven't heard about Carlton yet, but the other 2 said they're going to be here in person, and we'll be running Zoom that night too. But if you can be here for one or both of those nights, I think it'll enhance the experience. And so I'm just going to put a plug out there. If you're thinking about being here on campus, being up in Salt Lake, if you're downstate, one or both of those nights, it might be worth your time. In preparation for that, last time we talked, that had been last week's class, I heard from some students a request to have opportunity to have kind of a practice run on the presentations. And for that to happen, we need to start having practice sessions next week. Because we've got maybe a total of 16 projects to present, and so that's a lot to get through. We can't do it all in one night. And so we'll need to be having those kind of practice sessions next week and the week after. And so the email I sent out to you all on Thursday or Friday last week, I asked for volunteers to go for next week, and still listening, still waiting for that. Someone has to go the first week, and so I will put that plea out again because we can't all load up on the next week. There's just too many people. We won't get to everyone. So, Michelle. Oh, she volunteered. Her hand.
How should we plan on doing?
Presenting?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for asking. I guess we haven't covered this. You know, we've been talking about the content of what the presentations are, and you know, the more I think about it, the more simplified it becomes. You're identifying an issue, a problem or an opportunity. You are identifying alternatives for addressing that issue. and you are selecting and highlighting one of those as a preferred alternative for resolving that solution. And then you're done. I mean, there's more to it behind that. I mean, in presenting your preferred alternative, and this is the work we'll be doing tonight, you need to explain why. You know, why is it best to have, you know, crosswalk indicators at 400 west and 200 north, as opposed to other interventions that could be used? You know, why this solution over those solutions? So you do need to justify how you came to the conclusion that a particular alternative is the best alternative. But you really do need to cover it in about 5 minutes, because usually if you are presenting it, you know, at an open public comment period for a city council, for example, that's what you get. If you're lucky, sometimes it's 3 minutes. 2 minutes. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, to go quick.
You know, where are we getting inflation? Inflation has hit the other part of our life. Why does it hit this part too? This doesn't seem fair. So we're going to start with 5, understanding that in certain circumstances you might even get as few as 2, but 5 seems more humane. And since we get to create our own universe here, by golly, we're going to be more humane. So yes, and she's volunteering too. Next week, there she goes.
Just wondering for the alternative solutions, we want to keep it simple, like here's a photo of it. Let's not go into details unless there's a Q&A asking about it.
Yeah, so this is what we were working on last week, is just acknowledging that there are different ways to address a particular problem without going into any of the details. You don't have the time to go into listing all the attributes that go along with all the different possible alternatives and why you might want to use this one over that one. You can't do that. It's basically a list. It's almost a bullet point list. Here are the things that you could do to improve that intersection on 400 West. You could, have a slower design speed. You could have what they call bulb out, intersection reconstruction. You could have a center median. You could, you want to list 3 or 4 options that might address this issue, but then you do want to get to your preferred alternative. What's the best solution to address this issue? Because again, you can find it. So questions from Zoom, because I know you're out there, but I don't look for that.
Out there. Is it possible to suggest a combination, like kind of sounds like an amalgamation of a bunch of different ideas?
For projects or
for alternatives?
For alternatives, yes, by all means. And I think if you provide a list that's too short, people will think that you're not creative, or you're stonewalling, or you're hiding something. Or if it's too long, then you're not a good editor. So I think you're looking for 4 to 5. It's usually the best number. Okay, so no one has yet volunteered, so I will be hitting your email inboxes tomorrow morning, looking for volunteers, because we do need to be working on this next week. And what we're going to do, it will be opportunity for practice, but it will also be opportunity for people to react and give you some suggestions. And so it's essentially a kind of a workshop kind of atmosphere. So that's what we'll do next week. And then after that, I will need to get people sorted out for your final presentation, either April 10 or April 17. And if you haven't indicated your preference, and that would be everybody except 2. I have got 2 so far. I need to hear from you soon, so I can get you scheduled. And of course, the sooner that you speak up, the more likely it is that you'll get the date that you want. So please, please let me know as soon as you can. All right, so that was a lot of intro. As I was saying before, tonight's activity, when we break out into our groups, is to work on your preferred solution. This is the thing I've been wanting to talk about the whole time. You know what your preferred solution is. That's probably what started you on this process and your project. So now is the time to work on that. And the task, the challenge, is to be able to articulate it succinctly. And this is part of the problem because you've been thinking about it so much. You know all the ins and outs of this particular solution. You know why this one is just the best way to take care of this problem. And you want to tell whoever is willing to listen to you all the details. And of course you can, because you got 5 minutes. And so you need to focus on those aspects of the project that are first most descriptive, so people have a sense of what it is you're talking about, but also most persuasive. And that, of course, means the parts of the story that seem to have the biggest impact, that land the biggest punch. But also think about your audience. Think about the kinds of things that they might respond to, that you think, and of course you don't know for sure, you're trying to anticipate what your audience might value. But if you have some insight or some hunches on those things that you think your audience is going to resonate with more than others, you want to focus on those. Right? So those are kind of the 2 dimensions: descriptive, impact. And those are the kind of the 2 filters you want to bring about your preferred alternative. So are we ready to go into breakout? Great. So let's break out into our groups. Because I'm not very creative. We want to just locate ourselves where we located ourselves in the past, which means that Dave and Lucas will be here, and Anna and Kristen will be over there with your groups. And once again, maybe online, right? And you guys will stay here because your table that needs to be written your names on the table. I'm reading right. And Michelle, here, who is all of 22 they were originally going to open. I'm guessing. Oh, okay. Yes, yeah. Good. Go with it. It's very romantic. Well, that's good. Yeah, hold on.